It's been a long 2 days. We've had a wonderful time, lots of conversations happening, and so you made it to the end. Congratulations to you all. So the way we thought we should end this, often we have two things that happen in all AfriSoc conferences, and I've been in too many to admit in public. We end up with either excitement, oh my goodness, there is really a lot that can happen, or we end up with, oh my God, it's also depressing. So we thought we'll end differently this time. We'll end with, what am I going to do about it? And it's not just what the panel is going to do about it, it's what are you going to do about it? So on the poll, there's a commitment button. And you owe me. If you commit, you're going to do it. You know I'll find you. So the conversation today is we've had lots of challenges that have been mentioned. And the framing of it is that we've got a $1.6 trillion gap in sustainable development for the continent. 1.6 trillion dollars gap, right? That's 194 billion every year. So your mission, should you accept it, is that by the next 30 minutes, you will have found me 194 billion to fill that gap today, right? That's our conversation. That's the mission. But this is happening in sort of a context of various challenges that we've had about today, but it's also happening in a context of lots of opportunity that we've had about the last few days. So I am more than delighted to bring to the stage, I could tell you all their accolades and everything, but at the core of this, these are my friends. These are people that I look up to, people that I admire deeply, people that I've had such wonderful exchanges with, people who make my hair, by the way. People who are close to my heart. So this is a conversation with friends, right? And so I'm inviting you as my friends as well to be part of this conversation because we are moving the needle and we're doing it together. And so check your pockets. At the end of this, I'll give you an M-Pesa number like any good Kenyan to send my 194 billion. So allow me to welcome my wonderful friend Bolaji. Bolaji is the Managing Director of ETK. She's an advisor at the Entrepreneurship Center in Said, and she will tell you about herself. I don't give people introductions, otherwise it sounds like a neology. More than anything else, Bolaji is a powerhouse that has moved billions of dollars in pounds, actually, because you operate in the UK, billions of pounds into businesses in the continent. So I'm excited to hear from her. The next person is Kevin. Kev, yay! Kev, I like to call Kev the Beyonce of VC. And Daddy. and he's the guy behind all the big unicorns or unicamels you want to talk about in the continent, the Flutterwaves, Zandellas, all of that. He's invested in them. And he knows how money works in ways that I couldn't possibly explain. But more importantly, he knows how big Africa is, because he's got a concept of global Africa that I've hung on to. And then I'm going to invite my wonderful friend, Jonathan. Now, Jonathan is a global CEO of the most influential people of African descent. And this is remarkable because for some reason, if you go to the 2024 list, you will find somebody you might know. But more importantly, they've collated the group of over 2,000 incredible Africans moving and shaking the world. From Brazil to India to South America, anywhere, you name it. The Africans that are shaping our world are in their list. And so they know the people behind the movement. And so I'm excited to have this conversation with my wonderful friends and you, all my wonderful friends. So shall we dig into it? Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay, let's do this. So I'll start with B. If you could, both all of you, essentially, give us a quick round of introduction on how you came to this panel, besides me hounding your phones. What is it that drives you, and what is it that makes you think that we can fill the development gaps that we have in the continent? B.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm standing between you and your drinks, so I'll try to keep all my answers succinct. So I am on this panel because I have an itch that constantly needs scratching. I am Africa's chief optimist, and I am a a lover of the continent. And when I say the continent, I mean the continent. Every time I get into an African country, I kiss the ground. I am the chief manager, I'm the chief executive officer of ETK Group. ETK is a market entry advisory company. So we help companies who are looking to expand into the continent and across the continent. We've been around now for 14 years and we've done projects in 37 African countries. We also have a presence in 9 of those countries. So yes, we founded that 14 years ago. I also have an engineering hat. I am chair of the board of one of the UK's largest engineering companies, the international subsidiary, and we've also done 200 projects in Africa. We built lots of factories and installations out there, and during COVID, we managed to build the AstraZeneca facility as well. And finally, I am one of His Majesty's export champions, so I am a real big champion for Africa. Recently, I was the face of the Made in the UK Sold to the World campaign. I was the most reluctant model in the world. And people were sending me messages. I saw you in King's Cross. I saw you in Edinburgh, wherever. And so export is in my DNA. Expansion is in my DNA. I absolutely love that as a model for businesses growing and being resilient. So that's how I managed to end up on this panel with these wonderful gentlemen. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Good afternoon. I try to learn a new thing every day. And one thing I learned today is do not ever follow Bolaji on a panel or introduction. You will come away feeling severely underaccomplished. And that's me. So I just met Bolaji a few days ago, and I think if I died and came back as another gender or woman, it would be Bolaji. So I'm really, we've connected in such a way. So very quickly, I'm Kevin Simmons. And I think the best and easiest way to answer your question as to why I'm sitting here, I'm sitting here really because I have a strong sense of guilt. And it's a sense of really, within the last 12 months, I think I found my voice. And this is a voice that I think it started maybe 25 years ago when I first went to Africa. I was part of an organization in the US at the time. It was the largest student-run organization in the world at the time, the National Society of Black Engineers. And my remit as the international committee chair was to help expand the organization globally. And I sat on a beach in Ghana at the time where 50 of us, 50 Africans, and it was born Africans, adopted Africans, bred Africans, everything else. And, and I don't know at the time whether I chose Africa or Africa chose me, but that was kind of when it began. And now 25 years later, living and working in many places. I live in Nairobi and through a whole career in oil and gas. And then I fell into investments. The reason I'm sitting here and why I say that my story is one of what I call failed leadership is because in that time, there was a future that we thought we would see. And then I must say, I stepped away from that. We were young folks in the mission. It was myself and a couple others that didn't shy away from that mission. Achel Leke, Fred Swaniker, a lot of us at Stanford at the time, at the turn of the century, felt really powerful about this vision of what Africa could do. And then, I got discouraged and disenchanted. But then recently in my role as a VC, so I'm very fortunate to work with a firm that I believe is doing good work. We've invested in 160 companies across the African technology landscape, and the Andelas, the Flutterwaves, the Moves, all of them. And I realized that I have the best job in the world, where I get to be in different African capitals weekly. And what I see is we are in the future that I thought I would see. And so while there's a lot of doom and gloom about what Africa lacks, I realize Africa does not lack. And I can come tell you about the technology that I see being built all over. And I do it daily. I shock people. Everyone comes up to me, get a business card, and I tap my ring, and they get my information. I was like, oh, yeah, that's a Rwandan startup. Because I'm able to see and I'm blessed. So I'm here really to tell the message of what is really happening in all the different places that people don't really know about. And I always just say one last thing, because everyone says, well, why are you? I say, well, I was born in Africa. I was born in a part of Africa that is never shown on maps, but it is in Africa, because I was born in Barbados, but I believe in a global Africa. And so I will tell that story, and it is, and it is Africa, but I'll stop for now, because you will hear, but there's a lot to be encouraged about, and I think, the gap isn't as big as we think, and the future is guaranteed. So we'll talk about that. Sorry.
Okay.
So is this on? Okay, wonderful. Hi. Hi. Wonderful. Okay. So my name is Jonathan Olufuwobi, and I am I'm actually the head of research at MyPad. Come September, I'll be CEO by the grace. So we thank God. But the reason why I'm here is because I have a view on what's possible, right? So as Anne mentioned, over the past 7 years, MyPad has been building up a community recognizing the most influential people of African descent worldwide. And this is in collaboration with so how many people in here have heard of the United Nations International Decade for People of African Descent? Wonderful. So I usually get that response. Yeah. No one knows what it is. But essentially, the United Nations from 2015 to 2024 declared an International Decade for People of African Descent. So it's a decade built upon the three pillars of justice, development, and recognition. And recognition is the first pillar, right? MyPad is a recognition company which recognizes high achievers worldwide in collaboration on this decade. And in so doing, we've built up a community of these influential figures. And we're moving towards a more connected world, spiritually, economically, financially, and what's the last one? Culturally. And in so doing, also, we're building up a more sustainable community as well, because we're not self-sustainable. I don't know if you guys have seen figures online about how long the black dollar lasts compared to the Jewish dollar or the white dollar or the Asian dollar, but it's significantly less. And so building up a sustainable community is what we're advocates of.
Let me start with you, actually, Jonathan. So one thing that we've talked a lot about this few days was the youth dividend in the continent. I mean, I don't come after me for this, but the median age is 19. The average age of African leaders is 63, right? And I like to use the example, very concrete example of our next door neighbor, Uganda, where the median age is actually 15.7, right? That's the median age. I'm not going to say the age of the president, lest the internet get shut down. But why is this the case? And why aren't we actually seeing the wonderful young people that I am privileged to train every year here, getting into those positions, making a difference? Why is there age gap in our leadership?
Well, yes, so Africa has the youngest, the largest proportion of the youngest population, right? And not having a seat at those leadership tables is obviously an issue. And even it's an issue that MyPad have noticed as well. Even when it comes to recognition, when you're recognizing people based upon their accomplishments, you're recognizing people that are older because they've had more life experience. And that's the view that people tend to take towards leadership. You're wiser because you're older, right? And one of the efforts that MyPad is taking to strategically change this is to build up we built up a community of influential figures worldwide, but now we're building up a community of the next generation, right? And towards the end of this year, we've actually committed to recognizing the top 100 students of African descent based in the UK, right? And this is to connect them to our influential community, as well as to connect them to each other and to better opportunities. So I think it's based upon your question, to answer that directly, is the perception of young people as suitable for leadership positions. But the solution is to add them to that community and to allow them to have seats at the table.
Yeah, so how many of you want to be on the list, by the way? There you go. You've got your 100 already. Your 100 is sorted. One of the questions we've had throughout the conversation today has been, especially the last session about Africa being disintegrated. We don't trust each other. We don't invest in each other. Intra-Africa trade is at 18%. Things are not moving the way we would. What is holding us back? Why, Bolaji, are we not seeing the billions flow within the continent as we would want them to flow? Who's holding us back? And what can we do about it? Sorry, I forgot to give one ground rule. The rule in this panel when we had was, we're not going to say somebody should, somebody must, is I am and I will be. That's the only rule here. So what are you doing about it, and what will you be helping us do more about it?
I nearly forgot about that rule. I was about to start spieling out the statistics. Okay. So one thing that I found is that we are the biggest barrier to moving across the continent. What I've found is that every time I talk to an African entrepreneur on the ground, about an opportunity, say from Nigeria to Kenya, for instance, it's just so far away. I know nothing about Kenya. Can you get me into England, please? And I'm like, actually, that might not be the best course of action. And then I start reeling out the opportunities in Kenya as it pertains to what they are doing in the business world and what they could do to maximize those opportunities in Kenya. And then suddenly a light bulb goes on and they realize that actually it's probably something that they should embed into their strategy, Africa expansion. So there's a limited view on what the Africa dream really looks like with entrepreneurs on the ground. So what I'm doing is that I'm talking to companies that have the capacity to expand, bearing in mind that expansion is not for everyone, okay? It's not for the faint-hearted. Entering a new territory, market penetration, market development, it's not easy, right? So I'm talking to businesses that actually have that capacity, that are like elastic bands that if you stretch them, they won't snap. You know, those really strong ones, right? So they could potentially have and add value in another market, to look at those markets. And if they're backed by venture capital funds, they have the liquidity, they have the capability to do so, then I help facilitate that. That's what I'm doing.
Great. And that's a very good segue into, so you guys are becoming twins in my panel.
We are twins.
That's a setup.
This is,
I think that was a setup.
this is a situation I cannot handle. But you've been in the VC world for a while, but beyond that, you've seen the talent that has grown in the continent. We've come from the idea of where is the tech talent? It's all here in this room. What are we missing in terms of moving both the money, but also moving the people and moving the ideas? What is lacking in that process, and where can we slot ourselves in?
That's a very good question, and it's very challenging. Let me separate it into three things. So first, capital, then the talent, and the third one was okay. So in terms of the capital, yes, and I heard on the previous previous two panels, there was a lot of attention to the stats around the amount of venture capital that's flowing into the continent, and the fact, although there was a lot of focus on the fact that it has fallen last year, but it fell globally. We're still a lot further along than we were 5 years ago when we started in VC. So we didn't start in VC traditionally. I was in business school with a colleague. He was actually an Oxford guy at the time. And we set up what was Nigeria's first tech hub at the time. And it was just to help train entrepreneurs. And we didn't realize what that was going to lead to. And as those folks came out with businesses, we realized we needed to give them money. So we gave them our own money. And then I got another degree on top of the many. I got an LLM. So I learned by losing money. That's how we all started. And along that way, then we realized, actually, you know what, there's something to this. And so we built what's maybe one of the more active angel networks across the continent. And the reason I mention that is because it's all African. And there is starting to be an increase in the amount of capital available for founders and entrepreneurs. So in terms of kind of, your mantra here, what are we doing? We're putting our own capital in to do this. And I'm happy to say, there's still work to be done, but there's so many more VC firms and funds available now. Our ecosystem is really taken off the last couple of years, and Oxford is playing its part. So this is the third version in September. Every September now, it's called the African Venture Finance Program here at the Said School. And so this is the third version coming up. And it's been incredibly helpful for our ecosystem because now we're able to work together better. We're able to mobilize more capital. We're raising our fourth fund right now. It's a $100 million fund. And we're able to take that capital that we're getting from all the European DFIs and deploy it to founders. And there's a real need. So on the capital front, I'm encouraged at the direction. Regardless of the dip, I think there's more capital to come. And I would also just say one thing. I sometimes think we focus a bit too much on the amount of capital. I'm more focused on the efficacy of that capital. Yeah. What is being done with the capital, not just the size of the check, but what is that check going to do? What companies are we backing? How are we improving governance of those companies and outcomes? So first is an outcomes. Second, on the talent. So I'm an eternal optimist. I'm an optimist by nature. If not, I wouldn't be in VC, right? VC is a business where you do some work today, and in 10 years, you hope to see if it was good, it was good or not. But I'm really, really encouraged because, so when we started in 2010, 11, 12, founders, to be honest, they were early. But the quality of founder that we meet now, the quality of entrepreneur that sits in front of us. Last year we looked at 2,000 deals. The quality of teams is phenomenal and it's getting better. It literally reminds me a lot of kind of what I was around in, like, I'm going to age myself, before Y2K in Silicon Valley and Stanford. Like, it's the same kind of parallel thinking, the same kind of determination. So the founder has improved in Africa in the last 10 years. And that's why I'm optimistic about the direction of travel, because that talent gap has closed significantly. Now, everyone won't see it for another 5, 10 years, but I'm fortunate to sit where I can see, I'm talking to folks that, we talked about AI. I work with the Artificial Intelligence Center for Excellence in Kenya, John Kamara. I don't know if you know John. I go sit, he sent the tool that they built recently, Casper, phenomenal, to help banks, and Absol's looking at it and so on, do credit scoring. I mean, it's phenomenal what is being built. But again, everyone would know about it for another 5, 10 years because they have to go through that journey of maturity. And then finally, I would say in terms of ideas, I don't think we're short or lacking in terms of challenges to build and solutions to build on the continent. I think really maybe where we are deficient or slightly more deficient is in the capital and the people. But there's a host. And I mean, it's brilliant when you see what people are attempting to build. If I were just to sample, it's really amazing. From life science companies, we have folks, from that all the way across to different types of e-commerce and African commerce and creative industries. So I'm encouraged. My head is probably too deep in it to be objective.
Yeah.
But I'm an optimist, and I think that we're not lacking that much. But it just takes each of us to individually. And so I'll say this to everyone. If you want to get involved in that supply chain of capital, talent, or ideas, now there are many ways to do it. There are angel groups and angel networks around waiting for you to put. You can put 100, 2,000, 1,000, whatever you have, and you can get on board. You can join the fight with us. And so yeah, that's what I'm doing. And I hope all of you can do.
Good. So start shaking those pockets quickly. Can I ask, because I don't want to wait for engagement and all that, I'll ask quickly, where do you think is the highest population of Africans people outside of Africa? One person knew. I was waiting for this crowd. You guys are just sleeping over there in the corners. Hey. That's one of the things I realized in my conversations with MyPad, that we've got a huge populations of people of African descent across the world. And the question that was emerging later is that we don't have to entirely rely just on our 54 states. We don't have to, or 55, depending on who you ask. We don't have to rely with just the geographical Africa for our talent, our treasure, our time, our development. What has been your experience in pulling together people of multiple heritages, I would like to say, to really advance this question of Africa's development?
Yeah, so Kevin mentioned something important, which is that there's not a talent shortage, right? Put your hands up if you think there's a talent shortage amongst Black people worldwide. That's good. I was hoping no one would put their hands up. But there's no talent shortage. Like, as I've said, we've gone around the world for 7 years now, recognizing people of African descent who have significant talent. And all of you in this room, like, this is Oxford, right? No one's lacking talent here. So there's no talent shortage. And Brazil happens to be the place with the largest diaspora, largest concentration of people of African descent in the diaspora. And so being at the helm of a community like MyPad, and by helm, I mean we have the bird's eye view of the people in our community, and we can see where strategic collaborations could be made, and we can foster those collaborations. And one way we do that is through gathering all our honorees. And by the way, I want to say congratulations to Bolaji. By the way, she was recognized in an edition that dropped today, which is the top 100 in trading.
Today.
Yeah, today.
Happy Africa Day, Bolaji.
But she won't say it herself, so I'll say it. But yeah, so what we do is we gear up everyone for Recognition Week, which happens every year in New York, right, just after UNGA. And, so African leaders can come through too. And we gear people up, and that's a situation in which we can foster collaborations, because people fly from Brazil, people fly from China, people will fly from Kuala Lumpur or wherever it is to come to this in person. And last Recognition Week, even then, we saw a collaboration between a Brazilian shoemaker and a Miss Nigeria, right? So that's an example of on the continent and off the continent with Brazil. Even in the music industry, we saw this was something Camille was involved in at MyPad, but through MyPad, we fostered a collaboration between artists and music. So you guys, I don't know if you know who Isa is. Is she popular? And Tiwa Savage, right? That's a collaboration. They dropped the song last year. That's a collaboration that came about through MyPad, right? So these collaborations are there and they're possible, but it's like people are waiting for someone to say, you know, go and collaborate with this person. And I asked the question before about fear. Like, why is it that we're scared to collaborate with each other? And I think that's the issue, is the fear factor.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Thank you. um, it's, I mean, we've recognized that ourselves at ETK Group, and we've just opened an office in Sao Paulo in Brazil. Apart from the fact that we're working with the Aspen Institute to do some research out there, we're also looking at collaborating, creating collaborations between African countries or African entrepreneurs and Brazilian entrepreneurs of African descent, because we feel there's a real trick we're missing in that cross collaboration in the global south as well. And I would agree that one of the greatest resources, everyone goes on about Africa's resources, but one of the greatest resources we have is our intellect. Our intellectual property on that continent, and the harnessing of it is the next gold mine. And I think mining the minds of Africans is going to be the next oil. I think somebody was talking about that, is going to be the next oil, because there is so much out there. And I think, you know, I'm working with Anne as well to look at how we can enhance that intellectual property and how we can refine it. And then again, using the oil analogy, so that we can actually start to not just export it around the continent to help solve our problems, but also start to export it around the world. So I really genuinely think that there's so much more to be done in terms of using the intellectual capacity of our people. And like I said to you, again, what I am doing is creating a global innovation challenge on the continent, looking at products and services that are easily exportable, not just across the continent, but outside of the continent, so that we can actually start to add value in the real sector as well, like this ring, you know, I'm coming for it.
And before you move off of that, because I think it's really important to double tap on it and really highlight, and I want to give a warning here, because it is true that it's the African that's actually the most valuable. And when I say African, I always talk about Africa's people, not Africans. For far too long, we talk about where you were born or where you're from. That doesn't matter. It's a global African experience. And I have a whole talk about that. But here's what I've come to understand recently. And I want to make sure that we're not the last to recognize it, because what she says is correct. They're companies. I mean, on a monthly, if not weekly basis, I have companies that are coming to me from the US, the United Kingdom, from all over, trying to harness that young African talent. What people don't realize is in 5 years, the majority of the world's software is going to be built by brown and black people. I see the stats, I know the trends. And they're large companies, I won't call names here, a $1.9 billion company, for example, that has done it in Latin America, set up 10 delivery centers, and is coming to Africa to do the same. A delivery center is a dev shop. It's a room full of people building software for the world. And the problem is that I'm worried that they're going to get the real benefits. They're going to reap the benefits, and we're going to end up being, just as we are in agriculture or rare earth, kind of primary processors of and not the value add. So we really do have to sit up and take notice and recognize that we have a massive population of incredibly talented folks. If I build software now, I advise a lot of companies globally, I mean, a lot, through Set Squared and others. And when I hear people are building tech and developing in the UK, it's like, why? I can go give you 10 amazing developers tomorrow in Rwanda or in Kenya. And people are recognizing that. But we need to recognize it, because if not, we won't be able to harness it. So that's my warning. So anyway.
That's really important, because those brains are here. Somebody said something that broke my heart the other day. Said, we are walking on streets that are paved on our ancestors' blood. Our children might walk on streets paved on our brains. It got me to a place I can't begin to explain. So I'll leave that to simmer for a second. But moving on, I want to ask you a serious question. We've had these conversations on various forums. This morning, my wonderful mentor and sister friend Khetsi were told us about the $316 billion that's on the table because we won't unlock the potential of our women. 2% of VC funding goes to, women startups, women-led startups. The top 100 million plus, ventures across the continent, 91% are all male, founders and teams. Are we ever gonna get to? I need only 194 billion, remember, and this is almost double that, sat in the coffers because we won't unlock women's potential. What the hell is going on, friends?
Well, as you know, Anne, what were you doing on International Women's Day this year? So on International Women's Day, I got fed up of this issue. And I'm an angel investor. I don't write checks as big as my dear brother here, Kevin, but I do write checks just because I got fed up. And I decided that, we need to do something about this. And we need to think about ways of embedding investment in women into policy, into government policy. So on International Women's Day this year, I brought together angel investors, policymakers, lawmakers into the House of Lords. I gave them afternoon tea with a caveat. I said, there was about 80 of us, wasn't there? And I said to them, we need to do something about this. We need to start drafting a policy that actually causes investors to look at women-led businesses, because 2% is not good enough, And we talk about this and we throw this statistic around, but then nothing changes. And I mean, how many of us had mums who were entrepreneurs or at least had a side hustle? Okay, so look at the room. So you're saying 2% of those women received funding? Meanwhile, some of those side hustles got us here today. So something needs to change desperately. It doesn't just make, it's not just for warm, fuzzy feeling that we're doing these things. It makes economic sense. It makes commercial sense to invest in women. We all know this, right? So from my perspective, it needs to change. If you can't change government policy, internal policy in venture capital firms, private equity firms, needs to change. They need to be intentional about investing in women. And if you're a woman here and you're in VC, or you're in an investment bank, or you have some kind of control over money, you need to make your voice heard.
Well, we said it's action-packed, so what you going to do about it, Kev?
No, so first of all, it really is an incredible problem. And the funny thing is, what's really bizarre is that it's a problem of its own making and it's divorced from the data. Because the data is very clear that actually women-led businesses perform better. All of the, crisis nights I've had as a VC, all of the, strange stories, because we've invested in 160 companies, not all of them have done well. Many have failed. And when you get the call that someone has got up and moved to Toronto, you're like, huh, what? Or they were in one vertical and all of a sudden they're in a whole different business. It's never been the female founders. And of course, we could say, I'm not the type to do the defensive bit because, I do think we're doing our part. We're definitely, hopefully doing more than our part in terms of, the female partners on our team, the females on the team, the fact that all the deals I've done probably in the last 2 years have only been to women founders. So fortunately, there's a real increase in the number of women in the founding space, but it's not been enough. So I work with 2 funds. People don't know this. So everyone knows I work with Lofty Capital, but I actually work with a fund in the US called 3 Plus VCs, myself and someone who's phenomenal at building community. And it's a female founder fund. 3 Plus means we're trying to get above the 3%, which was kind of that ceiling for so long. And so I believe I'm incredibly committed to it. But to answer your question, what can I do more? I know you want to call it action or some kind of commitment. I'm going to stay committed to making sure that we give a more equitable chance to fund female-led businesses. And honestly, I would like to think that we won't fund a founding team that's all male. And to be honest with you, if you're building something right now and it's really an all-male team, it means that you're you're leaving yourself open to the possibility of a lot of failure from directions that you can't even see, because people do see things differently, and it's incredibly important to avoid failure as much as it is to aim and index for success. So, and I'll encourage my colleagues to do the same. So.
Great. How do we recognize women's contribution, and how's that happening in my part and other spaces that you're part of?
I think I think my answer is pretty much what people would know here, right? So it's going to increase when there's increased representation. I don't know if you guys know about Serena Williams, the tennis player, and how she's gotten into VC as well. The businesses that she's invested in, I think over 50% of them are women-led, and she's seen significant return on investment.
Yeah.
So that's as a result of increased representation. So if they're not looking like us, why would they have the incentive to invest in us? I know it makes economic sense, but it's just the way that things are. So the answer is to increase representation, but that comes about as a result of a community collaborating together for the greater good of the community. And again, to your point, that's what MyPad does. We foster those, we see the strategic collaborations that can be made, and we push for that, because otherwise people won't see it or they won't push for it themselves.
Yes.
But can I make one more statement? Just because there is a focus on VC, as there should be. Yeah. We are one type of capital allocator. Yes. But here's the thing, and this is for anyone out there who wants to be an LP, a limited partner in a fund. It's up to you to drive the behavior of the GPs, because we are going to do what our limited partners want. Yeah. So if Facebook is an investor in Meta, in our fund, in our third fund. So if Meta says we really want you to do X, trust me, we're going to do X. Yeah. So we'll do it on our own, but it can go faster and have more momentum if you agitate for your institutions that are funding capital providers like myself to make that a priority and a mandate. Yeah. So. Yeah.
That's really important. So a lot of the conversations, thank you for those who are sending their questions on the Slido. Somebody's called you a hero, by the way, just so you know. Aww. There's a question about how the African entrepreneurship ecosystem is just unforgiving of failures. So if we fail, we are all over the news. If we do anything wrong, we are on a hook eye. And we've had this chat as well, as even as individuals, right? We have such fear of failure because you're the one that's carrying your community. You're the African in the room. You're the one who, have to speak for the women and the Black people and this is now being translated in our innovation ecosystem, that we are so afraid of doing the wrong thing that we can't make big bets. We can't make big jumps. How do we get over this as individuals, as people, but also as companies, as startups, as people who want to build solutions? How do we get bolder?
Right. Sure. So this year's a big year for elections globally, right? So we have the mayoral elections in the UK. We have the prime minister elections that was just announced. We also have the US elections. And we know that people that run for these elections, they're not necessarily squeaky clean. You know what I'm saying? Like,
That's a very diplomatic way of putting it.
So we've got Donald Trump running for president, right? And Black people, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with voting for who you want to vote for, but Black people would vote for Donald Trump despite this corruption. They'd openly say it. But I think that there's a clear difference between accepting corruption or anything wrong with Black people when it comes to accepting the things that are wrong with white people. So we're clear on the fact that we can vote for someone who's corrupt in government, who's white. But when it comes to corruption and Black people, people run for the hills because those two words are mentioned all too often. And I think that's due to the perception that's given to us in the media, right? Which is also, as an aside, a reflection of how people perceive us, how they perceive Africa is how they perceive Black people. And so I think that that's the fear that we were talking about before, which hinders collaboration. If people in the West are concerned about corruption, which is what the image that they get from us in the media, is going to hinder collaboration. And I think that applies to Black people too, even though that's an unpopular opinion.
Tell me a bit about that perceived risk.
Yeah, so much to go into here. It's really, really true, and it holds us back. One of my theses for, I don't know, some degree was looking at entrepreneurial ecosystems. I was fortunate I was in sorry, I shouldn't have said it that way. But no, I looked at kind of what it takes to make like a Silicon Valley of whatever. I was living in Asia at the time, in Indonesia, as their ecosystem was taking off, and in Singapore. And I remember, being impressed by my roommate at school. Literally, when I was doing my master's degree at Stanford, would break down a computer. It was a Chinese guy. He was the first guy doing coding for open source like Linux, etc. And he set up a little business and it failed, and it was like it was nothing on him. And I was like, I was stunned. I'm from Caribbean. I have Caribbean parents. First of all, I fell in love with tech years ago, but I was at school to be an engineer. I couldn't go to everyone was coming out of my programs and going into startups. Caribbean parents, my parents were not going to hear, oh, you're leaving school to do what? And that's because, but here's it, I've looked at it. So culturally, and it's the same in Africa, we really attach our identity and our status to our achievement and not to the effort involved. And so failure has consequences way beyond just the actual venture. And the reason it's sad is this morning, my kids can tell you, I spent this morning talking to a 14-year-old in Malaysia that I was teaching here at Oxford Royal last summer, who has an idea for a phenomenal app. Like, I'm willing to invest in it. I told him I would advise him. He's done such work to do this thing. It was crazy. And I can only say that we as parents, and I'm saying it to my own children, we need to let people know that it's okay to fail. You know, it's okay to fail. What's really not okay is to not try. And so we really have to reward effort. We really have to say, we have to reduce that premium and that risk premium that is on failure in our communities. If we don't let each other fail, we will not succeed. So, you know, celebrate me for failing. I feel that a lot of things in life. And so I think we have to really kind of delink that academic thinking of being number one. And that it does us a disservice in the innovation space that I live in.
So we all came here because we were number one in class, eh? It's time to challenge that narrative. And I think one of the things we can do for ourselves, because this is an action focused conversation, is create room and space for your friends to fail. A place where my friend can fail. I know I fail often and a lot, and I come to Bolaji and say, girl, you don't know what I did. You know, and because she gives me a space to fail, I can actually innovate. I can try tomorrow and so forth. But so how are you creating space for yourself and for each other to fail fast and forward and quickly, so we can get to where we want to get quickly? That 195 billion is not waiting on nobody. So I'm going to ask one last round of questions, which is, how do we move from here? What do you commit to doing differently? How do we get this? How do we fill the gaps that people claim? In fact, let's move away from the gaps conversation. How do we get to where we want to get? What is the one thing that you think we can do that will unlock what we need to be able to unlock for the next step, for the continent, for your own particular sector, but also for your own continent? And as you think about that, think about the wonderful people in this room. They're diplomats, they're students, not students, they're scholars, they're intellectuals, they're entrepreneurs, they're innovators, they're financiers, they're policymakers, and so forth. What is it that we need to unlock to move to the next level?
Well, thank you for not asking me about the failure question, because it's quite triggering.
Sorry.
No, because I remember sticking with my business, not because I really wanted to, go for it, but because I was afraid of failing. Because I knew that the world was less forgiving for a woman, a Black woman, failing in her business. And, I just didn't know whether I could go anywhere from there. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to talk about how we move the needle, how we push on. I think, from my perspective, we also need to come together. And I know a lot of people have talked about this. We've talked about Ubuntu. We've talked about investing in each other. We've talked about collaborating with each other. But I think we need to go beyond that. I think we need to actually create communities, like small communities in different sectors, whether that's the tech industry, whether it's and actually start to really find strategic, structural ways to work together. I've done this in ETK Group. I said to myself, I'm not going to go around establishing little ETK groups everywhere or little ETK consultings everywhere. I'm going to find talented consultancy companies offering business development support, offering market entry support, and I'm going to work with them. I'm going to collaborate with them. I'm going to create an ecosystem of professional services companies on the continent that could match any professional service industry in the world. And it's boring, isn't it? It's a boring sector, but you can still disrupt a boring sector. We are now winning opportunities above the likes of McKinsey and Co., right? Because we've structured ourselves in a way that we are competitive. We've got the local knowledge, the local nuance, sort of in lockdown, pretty much. So the idea is that be intentional about collaboration, make it happen. Don't just talk about it, do about it.
Brilliant. Kevin.
No, I'm going to go back here because, so my background's in the military, right? I didn't take the traditional route. And I don't know, I think it was 97. I was a student at the United States Naval Academy at the time, and I did some time at West Point. And in 1997, there was a conference. And when you have a conference in Annapolis, it was a foreign affairs conference. I was a delegate. You get all the think tank types, policy types from DC, et cetera. And this conference was called China Rising. And this was, and so it was the first time I heard, and the military was very worried about China, but it wasn't a military-focused conference. It's the first time I heard something close to the term China Inc. I didn't know what it was. And then I think 2005, about 20 years ago, Ted Fishman, the author, brought out a book called China Inc. And when you read it, you understood it. And in the business world, you know what it is. No one questions China's dominance as a superpower in the business world now. They understand their ability to manufacture things at a third of the cost of the US or Europe. They understand 1.4, 1.6 billion consumers. They do. Africa has that. So recently I realized, you know what? Global Africa, and I don't know what it is. You asked me the other day, what is it? You said, it's a way to connect connected connectors. And I said, I'm now out speaking about Global Africa. It has no structure, it's inchoate, I don't know. But I am telling people that it's a force. Maybe it's a concept now, right? It's a force. I'm an engineer by background. People say, a force is something that acts upon a body to move it in a particular direction, et cetera. And people didn't always believe, and I want you to believe in Global Africa. People didn't believe in gravity when it was first. It was a concept. It took first one crazy scientist, Isaac Newton, to say, this is how apples fall from trees. And eventually, there was enough evidence, and other scientists believed. And, we all realized why apples fall from trees. And since gravity is an accepted force, I want everyone to believe and understand that what I'm starting to talk about globally, and I gave a talk recently in Johannesburg on global Africa, and that's how we are going to overcome, because it really is our competitive advantage. When I speak to a company and you ask that question, what will we do? I say, find that superpower, find that, that competitive advantage. And for us as people of African descent or Africa's people, I do believe we are trendsetters. And we don't believe it enough. And because, I told you the other day, belief is a verb. It means if I say it, it now is. And so people follow us culturally, people follow us in athletics, people follow us in everything. Yeah. It's the same in tech and innovation and business. So I'm speaking today about a concept that you won't believe now, but in 20 years, you will understand what I mean by global Africa. And that's how we're going to do it. That is your superpower. Lean into it, develop it with me. I don't know what it is, but we're going to go do it. And that's how we're going to overcome.
That's it. Global Africa is our superpower. Go on, John.
I like what Kevin's saying and what Bolaji said. I think to round it up, what we're saying is the same thing, which is that community is the driving force. But we just don't realize how powerful community is. Like do you guys remember the aftermath of George Floyd, right? You guys remember the aftermath? Yeah. So not the actual incident, but the aftermath. Companies left, right, and center were making declarations in support of BLM. But ask me which kind of companies are keeping those declarations. But the point is that at the time they were forced to, because they saw the power of a collective, right? And then the George Floyd thing, it wasn't anything new under the sun. It just got media attention, and we joined together as a collective, and it resulted in change. And so that goes to show the difference between tackling something individually in your silos, right, and globally tackling it together. So I think community again, to reinforce the point.
So I want to ask you the same question. What are you going to do about it, right? So if you look up the Slido thing, there's a question there. What do I commit to doing differently? Take out your phones. I'm waiting. I'm watching. Take out your phones. I know you've been WhatsApping and Instagramming, so take them out now. and hiding behind the scenes there and I'm asking the question. Someone said already, being present. What are you going to do differently? These problems are not going to solve themselves. So I'm going to finish with one. As you do that, I'll be reading them. I want to finish with one statistic that keeps me awake at night. One of the scholars asked me, what keeps you awake at night? You know what keeps me awake at night? We have about 500 million Africans who are between the ages of 18 and say 40. So the workhorses, that's you all here. And these 500 million people are expected to build the policies, build the infrastructure, repeal the problems of the past, fix our political systems for 2.5 billion people by 2050. So we've got 30 years, less than 25 years. You all have got 25 years to solve all the problems we've talked about, from the Horn of Africa to climate change to healthcare to pandemic, all of that within 25 years. You're the workforce of the world. And you're not solving these problems for Africa, you're solving them for the world. So the call for action today is, what are you going to do differently? Bolaji is going to commit to opening up spaces for African businesses, both within the continent and globally. Kev is committing to flowing funds and creating a movement around global Africa that is going to move the needle on the things that we care about, leveraging on our collective expertise. Jonathan is committing to rising the next generation of African leaders, letting them acknowledge their power and recognize their influence in the world and take up the positions of power to do so.
Yeah, and to add on to that, this is something that you can self-nominate to be a part of. So if you head to mypad.org/nominate, you can nominate yourself.
Yes.
And MyPad spelled MIPAD. So that's.
So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? So I'm looking at the Slido now. Please, people, don't get me fired, oh, please. Someone is ousting Museveni. Someone is reinvesting in Africa. Be a doer. Build a community of young women. I'm creating a working network. I'm sending the ladder down for hundreds more. Now we are in business. I love this. I'm going to finish my DPhil. This is, I love it. Finish it. Go and finish it. I'm going to use my knowledge and my skills. I'm going to build a bridge. I'm going to innovate. The point of this ending is that we are our best saviors.
Yeah.
We're our only saviors. So whatever Bolaji is committing to, whatever Kev is committing to, whatever Jonathan is committing, whatever I am committing to, are you committing to it as well? And how do I support what you're committing to so that we can both move forward together? And with that said, can I say a big thank you to my wonderful friends, to my co-conspirators, to my troublemakers for joining me in this conversation. It's been fun. And can I thank you so much for taking the time to spend the very last minutes of the conversation with us, for making commitments which are now in writing. I'm going to hunt you down. And for the last 2 days of being very present, very engaged, and very committed to being the change that you want to see in the continent. Thank you.